Hi Booktube and welcome to a new video. This is the Bookish Red Flags game, which is sort of a tag, I think. It was originated by The Reading Werewolf, but I saw Dane Reed's version and I'll post links to both of those. So this is a book's version of some sort of nonsense lovers thing where, you know, you put good and bad traits of a person you may have your eye on into a cup, and you pull out one or two good ones and one or two bad ones, and then you have to decide whether you're going to try and make a move on them or not. Sort of like marry, snog, avoid, I think. I don't know. In the original versions, they had clear, what they call green flags, which are sort of positive traits for the types of books, and red flags, which are things that would put them off picking up a book. And they would pick out 2 positive, 1 negative, although Dane then progressed on to 2 and 2, and then take a view on whether that book sounded appealing to them. Not a specific book, but a book with those combination of traits, and to see whether they would, on average, pick up more of the books or reject more of the books. But I found that difficult in one respect, is because sometimes a positive trait for a book, it could also be a negative trait in another book, even though it's the same trait. So for me, the interest is in the combination of these traits. So I've jotted down 30 distinct traits for books, and I'm going to pick out 3 at random by using this method. I went online, and this is a random number generator, and you can specify between 1 and 30. This is numbergenerator.org. So I'm going to use that to pick my 3 numbers. Unfortunately, there will be a bit of sort of repetition, and I'll just click until I get a number I haven't used before. And away we go. So the first one is 12, which is a book in small print. The next one is 23. You've just read something by the same author or on the same theme. And finally, that's going to be 12 again, 26. A book written by a favourite author, but under another name because of different genre. Okay, so individually, small print is off-putting. If it's too small, I really struggle to read it, so it'd have to be pretty amazing for me to want to read it. You've just read something by the same author on the same theme. I really tend to avoid doing that. But interestingly, it's sort of been mitigated by the last one I picked out, which is book written by a favourite author but under another name because it's a different genre. I can't think of too many authors that would apply to, so the fact that I just read that author, would I then and happen to chance on the same author but different genre, different name? So I think that's a rejection all round. Small print, no. I really wouldn't read 2 books by the same author back to back, and unlikely to read 2 books on a similar theme, although that can sometimes happen by accident because you don't know what the book's about till you start it. And 3, a book by an author you've read before and liked, but under a different name, different genre. So I think that's a pretty easy 3 straight no's. 5, Autofic. 20, contains magical realism. Autofic that contains magical realism, that's interesting. And 3, you've seen the film. Oh my god. Okay, I hate magical realism, so it would pretty much always rule out any book for me. I've seen the film, that would also rule out. Having said that, last week I read Ted Chiang's Stories of Your Life and Other Stories, which contains the story that formed the basis of the film Arrival. I'd seen the film first because I didn't know, based on a Ted Chiang short story, but that Ted Chiang book had been so highly recommended, I'd bought it and wanted to read it. Also, it's a book of short stories, only one of them had been adapted into a film. As it happens, that story is the best in the collection, but it absolutely pisses all over the film. And the other one was, what was it? I can't remember now. It was, oh yes, Autofic. No, I mean, I have read, you know, something like Annie Ernaux's The Years has been said that it's Autofic. To me, it isn't, but I can see why people claim that it is. I'm not interested in autofic. To me, all fiction is autofic to some extent, but the interest for me comes in when an author does a lot of work on the material to change it from their own subjective, personal story to make it much more universal. So 2 rejections out of 2. Next one, 30. You need a dictionary by your side while you read. 14. Visual images in the text. And that was autofic again. Didn't like the author's previous book, but liked earlier works. Okay, so need a dictionary by your side while you read. Well, that puts a lot of people off. It absolutely does not put me off. A book I read a couple of years ago, that was very much the case, was Darkenville's Cat by Alexander Theroux. In the end, I gave up with the dictionary and I just jotted the notes down, jotted the words down as I read and looked them all up at once. A lot of them were neologisms and weren't in the dictionary anyway, so that certainly wouldn't put me off. What was the next one? Oh yes, contains visual images in the text. Well, I'm normally not a fan of that, even though I like sort of non-linear fiction or fiction that's broken up rather than just blocks of print, but I often struggle to see the connection between visual images, photos or pictures, even in something like The Immigrants by Seybold, which is a brilliant book, and the photos contained in there are a bit of artifice on his part, because it's to give the impression that these are photos of the, you know, from the characters that he's describing, to make it seem as though it's autofic, but the photos are random as well, which he's carefully curated and collated to go against his text, but they do not directly have anything to do with the text in real life, so that's quite subversive. So I often find that sort of illustrations that accompany novels just don't do anything for me. Having said that, I have always had a dream of writing a book where every chapter starts with a majuscule, you know, like in the old-fashioned sort of religious text where the first letter of a page would be sort of ornate and colour and have sort of pictures or motifs in it. I still haven't quite found the right project to do that with, but that's not a whole page picture, or whereas that's simply part of the lettering, or to do with the lettering. And the last one was, I didn't like the author's previous book, but I like earlier ones. Well, if I like an author generally, one bad book would not disqualify them from me still being interested in reading their future work. So on the whole, that's a yes, that I need a dictionary, that I like the author though I dislike their previous work. Hopefully, if it's an author I like, they haven't used the old visual images before, and this is just a one-off, an aberration. So 2 no's, 1 yes. 29, may overlap with your own current work in progress. 23, you've just read something by the same. No, I've done that one. 11, ebook only. That's interesting. And done that before. And 10, Booktube darling book. Okay, so first of all, ebook only. I have bought some books that are ebook only, mainly non-fiction, but I never get round to reading them. I really don't like reading off a screen, so that's going to prejudice the rest of this one. May overlap with my own current work in progress. This is a tricky one, because when I've got a work in progress, I try and do all the reading relevant to it ahead of me sitting down to actually write it. But having said that, once I start writing it, there can always be stuff that feeds in from stuff I'm reading at the same time, but in theory is completely unrelated to my work. But you know, because I can go off on a, you know, do a sort of, you know, 300-page riff around a single word. You know, I can read a book completely unrelated to mine, find a word in it that just sets me off an association or images that do fit into my book. So that certainly wouldn't put me off, although it's an unlikely situation in the sense of, if I know it's going to be relevant to the theme of my book, I would be reading it before I was writing. And the other one was, yes, Booktube darling. Well, if a book is a Booktube darling, it means a lot of booktubers are talking about it now, and I never really see the value of me adding my voice to a chorus about it. So I will tend to try and wait for a year till all the hoo-ha has died down. You know, I'm a small to mid-sized booktuber. I think, you know, anything I have to say on it you know, where all these other booktubers talk about, it would just get lost, it would just get swallowed. So in and of itself, it wouldn't put me off reading a book, but it would make me less likely to read it until a year later. Next one, author from a country I've never read before. That's the country, I've never read a single author from that country. About to be adapted into a film, and formal experimentation. Oh my goodness. Okay, so formal experimentation always is going to be a yes for me. I can't think of almost any of these 30 prompts that would work against that. Having said that, about to be adapted into a film, well, if it's formally inventive on the page, it ain't going to work in the cinema because you're going to lose all of that. So I would feel very betrayed that that book was going to be adapted into a film. So that might mitigate, you know, my keenness to pick it up. And as for it's been written by an author from a country I've never read before, I would definitely, you know, that would only attract me to reading a book in isolation. And the fact that it's paired up with experimentation is, you know, that's a definite yes. So I think that's 3 no's and 2 yeses. Language pyrotechnics. Says it's a novel, but it's published by a poetry imprint. My wife recommends it. Okay, so it says it's a novel, but it's published by a poetry imprint. My wife recommends it. And linguistic or language pyrotechnics. Well, language pyrotechnics always is a positive feather in the cap. My wife recommends it. If it's got language pyrotechnics, she's probably not going to recommend it, I have to be honest. She likes more straightforward narrative. And often comes to me asking for words. I'm her sort of consultant dictionary person. And published by, it claims it's a novel, but published by a poetry press, which is sort of what happened with The Long Take. No, The Long Take by that poet. Got on the Booker long list. Can't remember his name. Robin Robinson, something like that. Scottish poet. And I quite like that book. I don't particularly get on with poetry, but I didn't, you know, it was blank verse. I didn't feel its sort of lyricism and poetry sort of got in the way. So this is a difficult one for me. For language pyrotechnics, yes. If it's really sort of poetry, but claiming to be a novel, not sure. And if my wife recommends it, that just doesn't compute with the language pyrotechnics. So I honestly don't know on that one. So, unpleasant social media presence or political views held by the author. Stitched together from fragments after the author's death. And recommended by Eric Karl Anderson. So that's recommended by Eric Karl Anderson. Stitched together from unpublished fragments after the author's death. And what was the other one? Oh yes, unpleasant social media or political values. Well, if the author's dead, we'll have to forego the social media and just talk about consider their political values. Okay, so on that last one, Celine, unpleasant human being, doesn't stop me. I am going to read Long Journey Through the Night, whatever it's called, this year. I did a whole video about whether an author's political views or sort of, you know, real life unpleasant behaviour, you know, could or should affect your opinion of their actual work. So that certainly wouldn't stop me. Recommended by Eric Karl Anderson. I love Eric Karl Anderson's videos. I share a lot of his taste. He recommended me The Years. He recommended me Sight by Jesse Greengrass. So we do have a lot in common, but I don't, you know, Eric reads so many more books than me. I couldn't, even if I wanted to, possibly carte blanche, take on board everything he says. So there are plenty of books of his that don't sound appealing to me, and I don't broach. So, but if it's got an Eric Karl Anderson seal of approval and it sounds interesting to me, that's going to double the likelihood that I will read it. And as to the third one, yeah, if they've died and it's put together from fragments, unpublished fragments, you know, such as David Foster Wallace's The Pale King. I've been badly sort of bitten for the music industry where artists have died and there's all these sort of, you know, unreleased demos and cutting studio floor tapes and stuff. So no, not really. And also, if you just think about it from the artist's point of view, an author, unless they're collaborating, has a singularity of vision. So if they die and someone else comes along, be it their editor or even be it their spouse, to put the finishing touches to it, it's not the, you know, that unity of their artistic vision for the book has dissolved, I'm afraid. So no. So Eric Carl Anderson, yes. Political views wouldn't bother me, so yes. But if it was from Fragments After Death, probably no. And on to the last one. There's only sort of a few left. A classic, 1,000 pages long, Blurbed by Sally Rooney or Jonathan Franzen. So when I say classic here, I don't necessarily mean Victorian classic. It can be a modern classic. So if it was a Victorian classic, it would be a no. But if it's a modern classic, then absolutely, depending, you know, what it was, I would certainly consider it. Blurbed by Sally Rooney or Jonathan Franzen, unfortunately, rules it out. And 1,000 pages long. Well, you know, I've got Ducks Newbury Port to read this year. I'm 230 pages into The Infinite Jest, which is another 1,000-page book. So I do battle with them, but I do struggle with them as well. You know, The Infinite Jest I'm going to have to read in small chunks, just because I don't like that feeling of not being able to read anything else. I mean, it's only me saying that I couldn't read anything else, but I don't like that feeling of a whole month being given to a 1,000-page book, and therefore a feeling of not getting anywhere, not having any other sort of inputs and of different literature. But Ducks Newbury Port, I'm planning on reading not in small bits, but planning on reading over the Christmas break, where there's that sort of, you know, 2-week period or whatever it is, where not much else is going on. So I'm looking forward to that, but I do find 1,000-word books challenging. So a 1,000-page book wouldn't put me off, but in combination with Blurbed by Franzen or Rooney and a classic is like to be a no. And I think that's probably it. Okay, I could do one more, I think. Just released, strong synopsis, and Deckled Edges. Well, you know, I do get excited by newly released books, unless they've already become a book. The interesting thing is that Booktube darling books, a lot of the big booktubers are going to receive advanced copies way before me. So that's when the sort of hype is built up. And by the time the book's out, that's when I say earlier that I have to wait a year. So if it is just released but not become a Booktube darling, I'm more than happy to read it. I think I said book along listed. Well, in a funny way, that doesn't have any impact one way or the other, in that I will still read the blurb and see if I'm interested in the theme or the suggestions of the style it's written in, unless it's an author I know already anyway. But having said that, this year I've picked up 3 books from the book along list that I had doubts that I wanted to read ahead of them being long listed, and it was really them being long listed that pushed me over the edge to getting them and reading them. And in the case of all 3, I wish I'd stuck to my guns. So I guess I am sort of vulnerable to you know, the effect of the booker. And Deckled Edges is a no. Unfortunately, the last book by my favourite author Ben Marcus was Deckled Edges, so I did have to battle through. But please, and especially Alfred J. Knopf in America, stop it with the Deckled Edges. Simply because I can't turn the pages, you know, you end up skipping 3 or 4. So there you have it. That was the Bookish Red Flags game, which I'm going to make into a tag. And I'm going to tag Big Hard Books and Classics, that's Alan, Celia, Elizabeth at Bookish North, Weird Book Club, who else am I going to tag? You don't have to use these. I'm going to pop in the description box. I'm going to publish these questions or prompts or whatever. You don't have to stick with mine. You can make your own up. So, for example, if you read a lot of genre or series, you can put that in, and also you can revert to the formal green flag, red flag distinction, which I chose to ignore. Thanks very much. Till next time.